In the last video where I discussed British Sonic books, I focused exclusively on 4 novels written by James Wallace, Carl Sargent, and Mark Gascoigne that were published by Virgin Books. However, as some of you pointed out in the comments, there were technically more that were published by a different company altogether, so I went online to check them out, and my immediate reaction was, that is one hell of a way to tell Amy you're not interested in dating her, Sonic. These are the Sonic the Hedgehog Adventure Gamebooks, consisting of 6 titles that were published in the UK between 1993 and 1996 by Penguin Books, not to be confused with the Sonic the Hedgehog Adventure Gamebooks by Ladybird Books that were also published in the UK around the same time. I can only hope there weren't any kids back then who asked for Sonic vs. Sonic as a Christmas present, only to end up with the glorified activity book that is Adventure Gamebook 3. And that's what these 4 really are. Colouring pages, mazes, spot the differences, counting objects, basically the sort of stuff you'd be given by your parents to make you shut the fuck up while you were waiting for your food at a McDonald's or a Hungry Horse. Ah, fuck, I think that might be too specific of an analogy. Thankfully though, these 6 books by Penguin aren't a bunch of activity sheets packaged together, otherwise this would have been a really short video. But they're not your traditional novels like the Martin Adams range either, because, well, these are game books. For those unfamiliar, game books are essentially choose-your-own adventure novels where you, yes you fucking idiot, have to decide what the characters do and roll a dice every so often, which in turn affects the outcome of the story. In other words, they're visual novels for boomers or people who want to play D&D but don't have any friends. At the beginning of each book, you need to fill out 2 pages containing Sonic's vital statistics, starting with his 6 abilities: speed, strength, agility, coolness, quick wit, and good looks. You pick the one that you want Sonic to be the best at and write the number 5 next to it, then a 4 next to the second best, 3 for the third best, and 2 next to the remaining abilities. These different numbers will represent what Sonic's strengths and weaknesses are. So for instance, I might make him absolute dog shit at running fast by giving his speed a 2, so that agility can become his strongest feat with a 5. At various points throughout the adventure, you'll be told to roll a 6-sided dice, and must add one of those ability numbers onto it in order to avoid danger or defeat an enemy. If the result is high enough, then you'll succeed, but roll too low and you'll lose, or potentially die as punishment for being shit. However, like in the games, Sonic begins with 3 lives and can earn extra ones by finding them in paths of the story, or by collecting 100 rings. The rings work identically to the games too. Collect them along the way, and you won't lose a life when hit, at the cost of losing some of your rings. You'll want to avoid that as much as possible though, because the number of rings you have at the end of each adventure acts as your score, enticing you to replay them to get a high score, or challenge your friends to see who can get the most rings. Now then, what does each adventure involve? Well, in Metal City Mayhem, Sonic must infiltrate the city of Robotropolis to save his friends, and defeat Robotnik's latest invention, the Technobot, before it can destroy Green Hill Zone. Then in Zone Rangers, he and Tails set out on a mission across the world and into outer space to undo Robotnik's brainwashing of Mobius's population, who are being ordered to destroy the various zones with bulldozers and other heavy machinery. These were both written by James Wallace, who you might remember as the author of Sonic the Hedgehog in the 4th Dimension and Sonic the Hedgehog and the Silicon Warriors, which I've discussed before. Sonic vs. Sonic and the Zone Zapper, the 3rd and 4th volumes in this series, follow Sonic as he attempts to stop his latest doppelganger from causing havoc across the planet, framing him in the process, and his quest for the Chaos Emeralds, so that he can revert the effects of Robotnik's reality inversion beam, which has turned Tails into an evil robot, and a badnik named Catcher into a hero that assists Sonic. Nigel Gross and John Sutherland took over writing duties for these 2 installments, and would go on to write the Lemmings Adventure Gamebooks together a year later. It's worth noting here that Sonic vs. Sonic has several major issues in regards to how you progress, as some sections will send you on a completely different path from the one you want to go on, or cause you to get stuck in an infinite loop doing the same choices. Jesus Christ, this thing must have been the 90s equivalent of Sonic 06. The final 2 entries in this range are Theme Park Panic and Stormin' Sonic, and were written by the editor of the Virgin Books tetralogy, Mark Gascoigne, alongside newcomer Jonathan Green, a very prolific gamebook author who I personally know for his Doctor Who related works. In Theme Park Panic, Sonic gets roped into taking Amy to a new theme park called Mobius World, which he soon learns has been taken over by Robotnik, and must save himself and his friends from numerous traps and badniks. And finally, in Stormin' Sonic, he and Tails team up to destroy the Weather Egg, Robotnik's newest creation, which is causing rapid and disastrous climate change all over the planet, as well as having to fight off Knuckles, who believes that Sonic is responsible for the bizarre weather. You might have noticed that I only gave a very brief plot outline for each book, and there's a good reason for that. There are nearly 100 different endings across all 6 of them, along with a shit ton of optional routes to take, secrets to collect, and a grand total of 1800 sections. Chaps, I love making content for you all, but I want this to be a brief overview of the Adventure Gamebooks, not a 2-hour video essay. I'll still tell you some neat trivia though, and show off some really funny ways that Sonic, Tails, and their friends can die if you massively cock up for good measure. In all fairness, these are the kinds of books that are best enjoyed by you playing along, making the choices and experiencing it all for yourself, so I highly recommend finding a copy on eBay and buying
£200? I'm not trying to buy cocaine.
Okay, let me rephrase. I highly recommend finding scans of the books online to play through if you're interested. I'm also thinking about doing a live stream at some point where we could play one of them together. I'll let you all vote on the paths we take, whether or not we fight enemies, and the ability numbers we give Sonic. Let me know if that's something you'd like to see in the future. Could be a good laugh. Especially if we pick the one where Sonic calls the reader a fucking ape descendant for trying to make him climb up a crane. Oh yeah, sorry, should have mentioned. This version of Sonic can break the fourth wall and talk to you directly. This'll happen if the choice you make confuses or annoys him, like in section 253 of Metal City Mayhem where, well, this happens. Hold it, pause the book here, time out, cut, okay? He walks to the front of the page and looks out at you. Now look, he says, I want a word with you about this running away idea. I'm not happy with it. Not happy at all. Running away is a human thing, not a hedgehog thing, and definitely not a cool blue hedgehog thing. Got that? Savvy? Okay, let's get this show back on the road. He turns away for a second, then looks back at you. Is this postmodern or what? He asks. Moments like this are a really nice, tongue-in-cheek jab at the gamebook formula, and gave me a good chuckle. Right then, as promised, let's go over some trivia, shall we? In the first two books, the pig character isn't called Porker Lewis, as was the norm for Sonic media during the 90s, but rather Porker Harris. I'm not too sure why it was changed, I can't find an answer anywhere online. Maybe Wallace simply misread the surname, or there's a 0.01% chance he did it as a nod to the visual arts consultancy Parker Harris, I don't know. There's also a homage to Sonic Sat-AM in Metal City Mayhem, with the titular Metal City being named Robotropolis, most likely stemming from both projects being in development at the same time. A group of crocodiles appear in Zone Rangers, as enemies for Sonic to fight. Their design very closely resembles Vector's classic look, especially with how the arms and upper torso are drawn. You might think, well, yeah, no shit, they're crocodiles, of course they'd be based on Vector. But Vector didn't make his debut until Knuckles Chaotix, which was released 2 years after Zone Rangers. Maybe the artist was given concept art from the first Sonic game to work from. It would explain the different eyes. While we're talking about Zone Rangers, this illustration has a few really fun references to various sci-fi franchises, directors, and companies. You can spot the Death Star and the TARDIS flying above Mobius, while the spaceships are named after the Toho Film Company, Stanley Kubrick, and Brian Yuzna respectively. When reading Sonic vs. Sonic and the Zone Zapper, you'll quickly notice a change in art style, as all of the characters are illustrated with Greg Martin's American box art designs. Sonic has his mohawk, Tails has those beady little eyes, and oh Christ, why does Robotnik look like he's just eaten a lemon that's caused his face to turn into a dick and balls? Thank God the beloved Pingus Man replaces him for Theme Park Panic and Storm in Sonic. Speaking of Storm and Sonic, there's a couple of sections where Knuckles calls Sonic a drongo, which is an Australian insult meaning idiot. Now I might be reading too much into it, but maybe this version of Knuckles was actually meant to be Aussie inspired, who knows? Before I wrap up, let's talk about deaths in these books, because as I mentioned before, there are some fucking hilarious ways that these characters can die, but also some really dark ones that I'm amazed got the green light from the publishers, and presumably Sega too. If Sonic and Tails don't put their spacesuits on quickly enough in Zone Rangers, they'll get thrown out of an airlock and die from explosive decompression. There's an option for Sonic to lie about being a spy in the same book, which will result in him getting tied to a stake and eaten alive by vultures. My personal favourite deaths and bad endings occur in Metal City Mayhem though. Sonic can indirectly cause the Technobot to flatten Green Hill Zone, killing all of his animal friends in the process. He can have an existential crisis upon seeing duplicates of himself and give up being a hero, believing that one of them is in fact the real Sonic. He can be executed by robots after getting knocked out with sleeping gas, or he can prioritise showing off to Sally Acorn by fighting a badnik, leading her to suffocate to death in a glass box as he becomes overwhelmed with guilt. And on that incredibly depressing note, that covers the basics of the Sonic the Hedgehog Adventure Gamebooks. As I said earlier, I highly recommend finding a copy and playing one of these for yourself if you're a fan of choose-your-own-adventure stories, role-playing games, or just want to give them a try. There's also Sonic Gamebook Origins, a fan game by the Power Player, which is a digital version of Sonic vs. Sonic that fixes the game-breaking progression and records every choice you make or item you collect, meaning you don't have to keep track of everything yourself. I'll pop a link to it in the description for you to check out. Anyway, I'm gonna go and read some absolutely unhinged reviews of Sonic games for the next video. See you then, fuckers.